It was half a decade ago now, on June 22nd, 2011, when Yorick was first released in League of Legends. This awful, disgusting tumor of a character that was put into the game to everyone's dismay. You may think I'm over-exaggerating here, but if you don't believe me, just look at the original champion spotlight for him. Nice dislike bar, by the way. And listen to the tone of Freak's voice. Listen to how sad and defeated he sounds, having to pretend that Yorick is anything other than awful.
I get jumped by LeBlanc while low on health. Unfortunately, I die, but thanks to Omen of Death, I have full control of my abilities when I respawn, so I get revenge before timing out.
Yeah, nice play there. I sure gotta go buy me this champion so I can make cool plays like that one. On release, Yorick was absolute trash. Nobody knew how to play him, nobody knew where to play him. It was one of the worst initial releases in League up until that point, and maybe since then as well. It felt like the idea for Yorick was the focus of his design more so than the gameplay. Like Riot wanted to make this cool gravedigger who summoned ghouls more so than they wanted to make a top laner or jungler or mid laner or support. Riot didn't seem to put too much thought into where he would be put in a standard 5v5 game of League of Legends, so nobody knew where to play him or how to play him because of it, and he's since been played in every single one of those roles I mentioned earlier since release, but his release was just god-awful. Eventually, players found a little bit of a trick to him, a strategy that worked out pretty well. You could run Yorick top lane, and because of how his kit worked, where he would deal ranged damage by summoning his W and E ghouls that would heal him and also did magic damage on their initial casts while scaling off of AD, it made it extremely hard to play against him when the Yorick player in question just did this spam two abilities, last hit while your opponent deals with them, and then spam them again when off cooldown strategy. The split damage in particular was really insane with high base damages and pretty good scaling where you couldn't just stack armor because then he would just spam a Z on you and you would get free magic damage, and you couldn't build magic resistance because then he would just run up and auto you. You couldn't really play against it, and the ghouls in particular were also super hard to click. You couldn't really kill them yourself. You had to just wait for them to die, and if you ever tried to fight Yorick in Defiance, he would outdamage you due to his free heals and some pretty insane DPS. So a few scumbag players who couldn't win games any other way than by abusing this freeload champion started ruining solo queue for everyone until eventually pro players picked it up, and then he got nerfed by Riot, who just left him crippled in the corner until they had the time to rework him. Well, thankfully that time has apparently finally arrived, and we now have the rework on the live server. Let's take a look at how it panned out. So I'll say this right away, I have mixed opinions on the rework. The old Yorick was cancer, let me acknowledge that and be upfront about it, but at the same time, I kind of liked having a champion who was focused so much on winning laning phase. Maybe this is just me living in the past and being a Season 2 player again, but when you picked Yorick, you didn't really think about what was happening anywhere on the map other than your own lane. You just focused on winning laning phase. You didn't think about TP ganking, you didn't think about team fighting, you didn't think about mid game, late game, you didn't think about or care what was happening to your teammates in the lanes below. You only focused on winning lane, which is a very selfish playstyle, but it was kind of nice having this champion whose niche was something that no one else could really do like Yorick. That's something that's finally changed with the rework. The new Yorick is almost the complete opposite. You cannot 1v1 in laning phase anymore. You cannot do that well. Don't try and 1v1 in laning phase anymore. It doesn't work out. It took so many games for it to finally get through my thick skull, so many games of dying over and over, but the reason I kept on trying it was because Riot kind of kept behind a few of the ideas of his initial kit that made me think maybe he would sort of play the same. Like, you have this big spooky ghost for your ultimate, and summoning ghouls that are annoying in laning phase is kind of the same play style, kinda, but they nerfed it super hard. Like, old Yorick was strong because of the initial damage on the minions cast, the bonuses those minions gave him, and the difficulty in removing them from the field, but all of that is gone now. He was never really that strong because of the minions themselves, but all of their added benefits are gone now. All you have are these minions that run around and don't do much else. The minions take forever to set up because you have to set up these little grave things, which, let me say, is kinda dumb. Like, it fits the game lore-wise and everything, but talking purely from a gameplay perspective, you guys know how we're always complaining about how Riot always makes champions whose abilities all start with every third auto attack? The reason they do that so frequently is because they can give really strong abilities that do stuff like percent max health true damage without making the ability overpowered, since it's not an instant proc. You can't just press a button and have the ability happen. You have to have a little bit of setup for it, and they can give these abilities more power because it takes that setup to use. Yorick's ghouls are the same way now in that they require the setup, but they don't really have the payoff. They don't have the initial damage on summoning, they don't buff Yorick in any sort of way, they're super easy to kill, they die to 1 auto attack, 1 tower shot, and towers and everything focus them very quickly. They deal a fair amount of damage if you can get them on your opponent and your opponent isn't smart enough to just auto attack once. Maybe they deal a little more damage than the old ghouls, but I don't know how much I like getting stranded, engaged upon, and having no goons to help me out. You can summon a couple of them with your ultimate if your ultimate isn't on its 2.5 minute cooldown, but it's easy to make his kit feel underwhelming if you don't get that initial setup, which takes time and your opponent sees it coming from a mile away. The rest of his kit does help him out a bit and it does have some neat ideas, but again, it can feel kind of underwhelming at times. His Q is an enhanced auto attack that lays one of his graves that he needs to summon his ghouls. It deals a little more damage with the auto attack and it actually heals you for a smidgen, but it heals you for so little in the early game that I bet most of you didn't even know it healed you your first time playing Yorick, and you just thought that extra health you were getting back was from that one mastery thingy. His W is a neat idea, forming terrain to block people off, and it can be a really good ability, most often in the late game using it on an Ashe or someone that doesn't have any escape, but in the laning phase it ultimately feels useless most of the time since Yorick is most often thrown top lane, where everybody already has a million movement abilities they can use to get out of it except for Yorick. His E can be nice, a good slow to help chase people down and movement speed buff for you. It also lets ghouls jump onto a specified target, but again, it can feel a little underwhelming early on. And then his ultimate, the Maiden of the Mist, actually feels pretty useful every once in a while. If you can stay alive long enough and get a solid 1v1 engaged that you're winning, she'll help you chase people down and deal some pretty solid damage to them. She's a kind of cool idea that's probably better than his old ultimate, even though she doesn't deal any damage on the initial cast, even though it really looks like she does, but I should probably just try and stop using her like Tibbers. In summary though, new Yorick is nothing like old Yorick for better or worse. While old Yorick was about dominating the early game and having a kind of okay ultimate for late game, new Yorick is about surviving the early game and having a kind of okay ultimate for late game. Your job is no longer to go ham at level 1 harassing with ghouls. That doesn't work anymore. You can still try it if you want, but you're just gonna die. Instead of trying to all in at level 1 over and over, try farming up a bit until the mid or late game and then 1v1ing. It took me a really long time to learn that. I played so many awful games for this video where I lost over and over, not understanding, and I honestly don't know how, but eventually, after losing enough games, I started killing people and winning. Sometimes it was because there was a dick who intentionally fed on the enemy team. Sometimes it was just, you know, a Riven player or something who didn't know how to close out a game. Typical free win. But after banging my head against the wall that is the Yorick Rework enough times, eventually I started figuring him out. That's not to say I understand the champion. I get his abilities, I know what they do, but I don't understand how that translates into this kind of damage, but whatever. I think the strategy here for anyone looking to pick him up is lose with him enough and then you'll figure out how to win, I think. I'm not really sure what's going on anymore, but yeah.